Welcome to the Great Basin Fire Potential Outlook for February through May 2018. This is Gina McGuire. Over the next several minutes, we'll talk about the recent weather conditions and how that has played a role in our current drought conditions and fuel conditions, and also the expectations for the weather and fire potential for the next several months. Looking at the recent weather trend for temperature in the month of January, you can see in the image on the left, temperatures were above normal all across the west, especially over Idaho, northern Utah, and northern Nevada. Precipitation through January was generally below normal over much of Utah and Nevada, but above normal over southern Nevada into the Arizona Strip and southwest Utah due to storms we had earlier in the month, and also above normal for parts of the higher elevations of central Idaho into Wyoming. Looking at the precipitation throughout the water year, starting in October 1st of 2017 to present, you can see we've seen well below normal precipitation over the southern two-thirds of the Great Basin, with the only area seeing near to just above normal precipitation has been confined to central Idaho and the higher terrain of western Wyoming. And how this has impacted our current snowpack. As expected, we have well below normal snowpack over much of Nevada, Utah, and up further north, we have near normal snowpack now over parts of Wyoming into central Idaho, but again, lower conditions into far southern Idaho. Looking at how this has affected the drought situation across the Great Basin, drought has returned to the Arizona Strip and Utah, with now moderate to severe drought in much of Utah and those areas, and we are seeing abnormally dry conditions return to Nevada and southern Idaho. We are not expecting much improvement in this drought situation, especially across Utah and the Arizona Strip. We'll likely see those drought conditions continue, with no drought development expected further north across the basin. Now we'll talk about our fuel conditions and how the weather has affected that over the recent months. First off, with the very dry and warm conditions we've seen, our 1,000-hour fuel moistures are relatively low over the southern half of the Great Basin. And we're even seeing that trend obviously in the 100-hour fuel moisture, especially over the southern half of Nevada, Utah, into the Arizona Strip. However, with the recent warm and dry conditions, we have our 10-hour fuel moistures representing more of our fine fuels, showing very low fuel moistures over the southern half to two-thirds of the Great Basin. And what's very important about this slide is that we did obviously have a very heavy winter in the winter of 2016 and 17, giving us well above normal grass crop over the northern half of Nevada into parts of northern Utah and parts of far southern Idaho. The warm and dry conditions we've seen recently with the very low snowpack also will likely allow many of these grasses to remain in place over these areas and not be compacted by what would normally be expected in the winter when we see lower elevation snowfall. So a lot of these grasses are going to be coming into play throughout the upcoming fire season, and we will discuss that later in the presentation. We'll now look at the animation of the sea surface temperature anomalies off the Central and South American coast. This will indicate whether we are in La Nina, El Nino, or neutral. You can see over time the ocean waters have been cooling with relation to normal off the Central and South American coast. This is indicative of a developing La Nina. This La Nina right now is fairly weak, and we will talk about what will happen over the next several months in the next slide. This slide shows the many model possibilities of what could happen to our currently very weak La Nina. As we step through time over the next few months, we'll likely see maybe some gradual warming of the ocean temperatures, taking us into either a weak La Nina, continuing that scenario, or bringing us up into a cooler neutral scenario through much of the spring and summer. We do have some possibilities later in the year going to an El Nino, but that's pretty uncertain at the present time. Now we've talked about what has happened recently in our weather, how that's affected our fuel conditions. So now we're going to look at what we're expecting here over the next few months. Looking at the weather pattern from February through May, this middle row is showing our expectations for changes in temperatures over the next 4 months, with the bottom row showing expectations in precipitation. So first in February, we're looking at rather warm and dry conditions, at least for the early part of the month for the southern half of the Great Basin, and we've been seeing that already through the end of January. Any precipitation will continue to be focused over northern areas of the Great Basin. As we move into March, we're still seeing this warmer and drier pattern really continue to hold on over the southern half of the Great Basin. However, April becomes a little bit more certain. We may continue with this warm and dry scenario in southern areas, but we may see a little bit more moisture at times move across Idaho, possibly even northern Nevada, with potentially some cooler temperatures. However, as we get into May again, we're likely to see that return of warmer and drier conditions especially over some of our more concerning areas of Nevada, Utah, and the Arizona Strip. So as we move through the next few months, the main thing to keep in mind is that especially when we are warmer and drier, and we have a lot of these grasses in the lower elevations, especially in northern and western Nevada, into parts of northern Utah and southern Idaho, that during and after these warm and dry periods, we could see an increase in non-natural starts for fires, and these fires in the grasses would tend to spread more than we would typically see this time of year in February and March. So even through the rest of the winter and early spring, we're still expecting a little bit more growth in our fires than what we would typically see this time of year. Now we'll put all the pieces together and talk about the later portion of the spring into early summer. Here's our outlook for the Great Basin for the next few months. Again, we're looking at normal fire potential February and March, with the exception being in the fine fuels of northern and western Nevada, into parts of northern Utah and southern Idaho, again where we have that abundance of fine fuels. When we do get non-natural starts here in the late winter and early spring, we could see that potential for larger growth than typical this time of year. Now, looking at the start of the fire season as we get towards April and May, we're likely going to see an early start to fire season once again this year, especially in the low elevation fine fuels, and we have indicated above normal for mainly the May time period over southern Utah. And again, this is mainly in our mid to higher elevations. These areas of the Great Basin, we did not see a significant grass growth last year, and with the drier winter this year, we likely won't see much fine fuel this year either. However, it's the mid and higher elevations that have been very dry over the last few months that are most concerning. Now, one caveat as we move into later in April and May, if we do see a very dry pattern, we could see above normal fire potential return in a very large area over northern and western Nevada, potentially into northern Utah and southern Idaho. But right now we're holding off on that, at least on the timing, just due to the uncertainty of the weather pattern, but we are expecting a busy fire season for much of those areas that saw a busy fire season last year, just due to the grasses not being compacted. So here's our national fire potential outlook across the country, and you can see where those areas of above normal are. So again, for the Great Basin, we're really targeting the southern areas in April and later in April and in early May, but we may see a greater expanse of this above normal. In fact, we'll likely see it further north in the Great Basin, possibly as early as May, certainly as we get into June and July. That concludes our briefing for today. Check back next month for the latest updates.